All right. Regarding what we were still talking about the new, though unlisted, new primary activity, the fourth S, speech. And right about where we were last time is consider that talk is no longer a human option. It is not an alternative course. It is not an elective. In another sense, talk is no longer strictly or just a part of the secondary world, and thus it can no longer, in any general survey, it can no longer be classified in any way as being unnecessary, which, if you recall what we were talking about just very recently, is the secondary world runs on the unnecessary. It's why it must be defended, why everyone's hobbies, why everyone's apparent personality, why everything above what we've been describing as the primary level of the three S's of sex, shelter, and sustenance, why everything else seems as though you've got to defend it, you've got to justify it. Everything in life at the ordinary city level, men have to justify one way or the other, whether they do it literally, whether they do it in a crude manner. You're constantly, such as having a voiceover to your own life. You do something and you got to stop and you got to explain it to somebody. If you're not explaining it to somebody contemporaneously, so I hear people explain it to dead people. That is, that people are trying to, they're talking to their mother or father who's been dead for years about, well, I didn't mean to do that. It is a running commentary of the unnecessary. But once you see, speaking of humanity as a whole, that speech is indeed, it is not yet classified, and you can't sit around waiting for it, whether it happens in your lifetime or not. It won't be of any use by then. That speech is now one of the primary activities. Once you see that, then there is no way that speech in any manner can be classified as unnecessary. Although I know it is. And although you know yourself at the ordinary level, you continually say that you, well, probably other people more than yourself, of course, but other people and sometimes even you can get caught up in the babble syndrome. Just flap your lips and run your tongue. And it's just, most of it's unnecessary. As Cervantes said, el wrongo. I'm guessing. I'm not sure he said that, but I'm guessing. Well, all right, I know this. The man failed second year of Spanish, so I wouldn't be surprised if he did not talk like that. Well, if you keep those two in mind, they can tie together, and I'm going to push on 2 or 3 different areas around the same campfire. But that human speech is just absolutely, it's just no, I can start out like I did last time about suggesting and look at it this way, but I'm just simply pointing out to you a fact that the ordinary nervous system is not wired up to see, as all of this is. It's not right or wrong, but they are not wired up to see it. But human speech is no longer an elective. And any anomalies anywhere on this planet of people not talking, whether it be in the midst of Chicago or Miami, or if it be in the wilds of New Guinea, wherever it is, those people are not part of the mainstream. That's simply it. The world does not run on the fuel of that kind of nervous system. Speech is not an option. Once you realize that, you also realize it is no longer just a part of the secondary world. It is not just something, as for the sake of description and relative coloring book talk, we could say that in the past, if we want to play the physical evolutionary game of caveman and etc., that we could say, all right, at one time speech was optional. That just like you could now, those of you who know how to do it, you could suddenly pop yourself into the outlands of Australia or in some deserted island, and that you didn't speak, even you and 3 or 4 other people, you didn't speak, and you could still eat, you could still get out of the rain, and you could still figure out how to make love. You could do that. But that is not what fuels life, and you are simply and strictly anomalous, anachronistic, superfluous. It is not an option, and speech is no longer just a part of the secondary world. Now, we can't say it is part of the secondary world. If you recall, with the kinds of operational descriptions and definitions that I was using last time, it fits the kind of criteria necessary for what we're describing as primary activities. It fits singularly out of the other possibilities that it is both necessary and recreational. Whereas if it is strictly something in the secondary world, like stamp collecting, you can say it's entertaining, and I'll take your word for it, but you'll have to admit it's not necessary. Whereas sex, at just the general level, is both necessary, everybody understands that, to keep the race going, but it can also be entertaining. But if you get into something that is still simply a part of the secondary world, which is no negative reflection because it is necessary in its unnecessariness, the secondary world must exist, but anything that is simply secondary by its very nature, something that grew from the soil of the primary, does not fit that criteria, whereas speech does. Speech is absolutely necessary today. You can all see that without us beating it into the ground. Modern life, forget the desert islands and forget being an illiterate somebody held up in the crawl space of a tenement in St. Louis. In the midst of modern life, talk is essential. It is not optional. But also, it fits the criteria. It is not just essential, it is also a hobby, which is part of the basis of many people at many times criticizing one another for their mechanical, excessive speech. Whereas it's just a hobby. It's entertainment. That they may not be saying anything if you popped up and say, well, listen to this conversation. These people over here, they're about to get in a fight even. And these two guys are arguing about basketball. Well, that's not essential. You're right. But ask them, is it entertaining? Or if you can see it all, is it entertaining? It's got to be. So remember, it is tied to this part of the same dance team, but talk, human speech, is not an option. It is not an elective. And it is thus no longer just a part of the secondary world, although at the entertainment level it is part of the secondary world, the same as screwing, the same as sex can be fun. When it's at that level, then for the sake of us diagramming this, or you thinking about it, then you can say, all right, it is sex, or dining is now, when you're dining instead of just eating, dining is now entertainment, and it is a part of the secondary world. But you cannot have dining without eating. You cannot have recreational sex without primary sex, without it being there. It had to grow from somewhere. That is sort of the dance partner of where speech is now. And just realize, I'm sure all of you can do it by now, but I'll say it, that we're speaking of man the organism. We're speaking of humanity, not an individual, because there's no doubt, and surely nobody's going to choke anymore except those perhaps new to this. It has nothing to do with individual exceptions. There are people who are deaf and dumb, and there are people on this planet, for all I know, to keep the funds rolling in to the Smithsonian or National Geographic. As we all know, every 5 or 6 years somebody says, we just found a tribe who are still living in the Stone Age, and they can't even talk. Where? The Philippines? No, Oklahoma City. There's always something going on, but just forget that. And forget the fact there are people who, by whatever means they try to judge it, seem to have a fairly alive, at least no physical dysfunctioning of their brain, but who are deaf and dumb. And you can say, well, there are people in the midst of contemporary life who cannot speak, and yet they live. Cool it, that's just a hobby. We're talking about humanity. We're talking about the organism of man. At that level, talk is necessary for humanity to survive. It's not in question. You just got to be able to see it. Not because I'm right, but it is as necessary as it is for man to now multiply, for humanity to build, for humanity to seek shelter. Speech for humanity, for man the organism, is non-essential. At the level of it being a primary, you should be able to separate it for your own sake, as long as you need to look at it verbally in specifics. That it is, you can't look at speech as being any longer some sort of servant of expediency for the other primary needs. I say that on the basis that I've tried to drag some of your attention up over the last few months to even play the old kind of cartoon caveman evolutionary game and say that you could look at speech as starting out as one of the purposes of speech is based upon the three primaries at some early age, and speech came about as being able to assist the primaries, such as being able, the people are starving. And one guy wanders off and a few days comes back later, he comes back and he's wiping his mouth, and he looks nice and healthy. And they say, where'd you find food, if they could talk? And speech is, he can say, well, you go down about 5 big boulders and you hang a right, and there's some bushes there that got berries on them. So you can say that speech started out, if you want to play this, I'm just bringing it up to try and ease you into it again for you to look at it. You could say at one time, if you want to play that speech had to in some way be simply an assist to the primaries, to the three primaries. That man was just living at that level, and then speech sort of became an add-on, an aftermarket accessory. That it makes life a lot easier. Yeah. All right, let's say that. Let's say it went on for 10,000, 15,000 years. Whatever historical game you want to play. But now you cannot look at it as being a servant of efficiency. It is not simply serving the needs of the other three S's, which sometimes it does, but they serve each other's needs. But it no longer just serves the needs, because it is no longer just a part of the secondary world. It now is a part of the primary world. It is now past the point of being any, much less unnecessary, but past the point of even being an elective. Speech now has a life, it has a hunger, and it has a purpose of its own. Speech is now, in the sense that we were talking about a few nights ago, speech is now its own primary reality, and once something is a primary reality, by its own existence, it is its own justification. If you recall, we were trying to note that the primaries do not have to defend themselves. You remember we were talking about how the secondary world, all of man's secondary activities, that you're a subject. You're constantly, in a sense, defending and justifying, explaining it. Because, and from one view, because it's unnecessary. And then I was trying to get you to consider that the primaries never have to defend themselves. They're not even subject to it. That you cannot attack any sane man for his primary activities. You cannot make a sane man, an ordinary man, humanity the organism. You cannot make a sane man respond to an attack. Do you still eat food? You can't do it. The primary does not have to defend itself, because that which is primary, it, in a sense, at that level, is like saying reality does not have to justify itself. Reality simply is. In that same way, you can say that all primary activities do not have to defend themselves. Their existence, their mere existence, is its own justification. In other words, you don't have to defend eating. It's insane to even talk about it. The fact that you have to eat to live is its own proof. It's its own justification. Speech has now reached that point. Speech has now become its own primary reality, and it does not have to defend itself. It still does, but in a way that people doesn't notice, in the same way that if it was ordinary intelligence listening to this, they could say, just from the last few minutes, I was wrong about people do not have to defend themselves eating. Because they'd fall in that trap of saying, well, sure, you put on a few pounds and your friends say, bent that icebox, haven't you? And you go, oh, yeah. And then you have to that's not eating. They're attacking the secondary. They're attacking overeating. That's the hobby of eating, is overeating. By that same token, they would say that speech justifies itself. People continually have to say, wait a minute, let me explain what I meant. You guys took me wrong. No, wait a minute. Now I know what you're thinking, but that's not what I meant to say. I know that. But that is at the secondary level. They're justifying that's overeating. They're justifying over talking. There's nothing wrong with it, but it is now speech back at or at the secondary level, whereas it is entertaining. It's not just necessary, it's entertaining. At a very, although it's new, but it's a very basic level, I assume you can hear it, that men must talk more and more, and one way to look at it, this is not the only way, but one way is they must talk more and more to get verbal exercise, because verbal exercise in a different context, but verbal exercise is needed by speech in the same way as another context that exercise is for the muscle. God, did that get too complicated? You need to practice talking. Speech needs to be exercised the same way that people need to jog, lift weights, or do sit-ups, or do something to exercise the physical muscles. Speech needs to be exercised. That's not a justification for talking. It's just another way to realize that it is now past the point of being a secondary option. It is past the point of being just a hobby. And the whole idea that ordinary people have toward one another about everybody talks too much. They're exercising. If indeed you're correct from some very crude and meaningless view, if you're correct that, wait a minute, this talk right over here that I'm observing right now, this is not necessary. That is not passing important information. Those people are just babbling. They're exercising. They're not even paying attention to what they're doing. Well, come on, go in the gym. Do you have to stand around if you're going, start doing this? Or if you got to stand there and look at it? Not that some of them don't, but if you got to stand there and look at your muscle to exercise, you can do that and talk to somebody. You can do that and spit on the floor. You can talk and not paying attention to what you're doing. So what? It's exercise. Are you going to sit there and spend 10 or 15 minutes or an hour by yourself somewhere working out or in a gym, and you sit down and you look at your stomach every second you exercise and do a sit-up? Don't be silly. It's just exercise. You're not paying attention to it. Speech at the very secondary level is a form of exercise. And people, everybody, must talk more and more at the ordinary level. You must exercise speech. You might note with this ever-increasing need for man to speak has coincidentally, how about coincidentally, coincidentally, I thought I was going to start a church sometime, a cult, a used car lot based upon the concept of coincidentally. Some of you promised we were going to do that. Consider coincidentally how what I'm pointing out, and I'm sure that some of you can see by now, the ever-increasing need for man to speak, that coincidentally has come about such things. As we mentioned, that out there in life now has been named and recognized as the information age. Isn't that coincidental? This would be time for a good letter, to have a Kyroot, another letter from a viewer saying, yeah, wait a minute. The whole thing about the information age, you just realized that. You read it somewhere and you thought, wait a minute, I'll make up something to fit it. And then you start saying man has to talk more than he used to. Well, damn, caught again. Coincidentally, isn't it something that we're now in the age of information? And everything, by the way, just for a second, even though we could start a used car lot, and if that failed, I guess we could do a religion on it. Of course, I lost faith in the ideas of a new religion after I let Kyroot tell you people about one a few nights ago about those two guys that decided to pool their resources. And amongst other things, they decided to come up with one common name. Nobody seemed to like it. They called their new religion Cuts and Bruises. Maybe you didn't hear it, and then again, maybe you did. But coincidentally, back to coincidentally, is from a neuro-revolutionist view, every time there's something coincidental, such as the New Age and it being, the information age as it's called now, me saying that there is a whole new level of the primary requirement for speech and how it increases just constantly. That this coincidentally, here in that example, and in any other kind of example you could see as being a kind of tangible side, that is, it's visible from the city view, and they call it information age, and that's just a tangible side of what is really an unnoted kind of parallel energy. That's not really it, but how about the Kyroot tonight that noted that all shadows bear a remarkable resemblance to those objects or people who cast them, semicolon. Yeah. all secondaries bear a striking resemblance to the primaries that cast them. I guess you got your choice. If you live in the city, you can say, Jesus, that is so obvious that I could lay down and take a nap. Or else you could say, holy mother, what in the hell does that mean? Or I guess you could maybe climb up off street level and go, kind of makes you wonder, don't it? It was back where we were, in case you lost your place, was coincidentally. About here it is, I'm just accepting, we're not making fun, it is a fact. This is a fair representation of calling this the age of information. I mean, it's worldwide. Consider the anachronism of states in the broadest symbolic sense, or metaphorical even. The anachronism of state flags that show hammers and sickles. The industrial age. I mean, we all got to eat, so the sickle, what it represents, farmers. But my God, we're down to the point, I don't know what. What is it? One farmer feeds 5 million people? Well, one farm company, of course. But the day of, you're in the midst of something else, really off. Well, it's the same track, but right now, here we are living in our part of the world in this constant carping, whining, that we're losing out to all the rest of the world because X country is now producing more iron and steel than we are, and such company or country is producing more automobiles, more toasters, and etc. That day is, we all got to have toasters, especially those of us who have raw poets at home. And you got to have iron and steel and etc., as we mentioned. But the day of that being of great significance in the countries, I was just thinking what brought it to mind and what it represents metaphorically. It's a great, vexillium of the people, represented by the hammer and sickle, the sweat of the brow, the digging up of the earth, all primary, necessary aspects. But that's out of date. I mean, it's still necessary, but that's not going to get you anywhere. It is now the movement of the non-tangibles. They are correct in calling it the age of the information age. But I was just saying, coincidentally, no one notices another. They can explain it from their view, which is true. They can say, well, it's now because, and they start going into how services are more important. They can explain it in all kinds of ways, business-wise, sociologically wise, all kinds of ways. I'm pointing out, coincidentally, assuming I'm pointing out something to you that has some validity over the last 2 nights, that speech itself has now become as irreversible from the primary basic existence of humanity as a whole as is sex and eating. If that be true, notice the coincidentalness that it's now the age of information. I'm giving it to you the kind of more basic, the primaries that are casting the secondary shadows. People have to talk more. What'd you expect? What's it going to be? Well, we'll go back and we'll have a whole new age, a fresh age of smelting pot operations. Not hardly. It is the age of information because it is the age of increasing speech. There is a growing obsoleteness of primary heavy humanity. You don't like that better than the flags of states representing heavy industries, primary needs being outdated? Take the individuals. Those who are now more primary top-heavy become more and more obsolete, of less and less consequence. Now, they'll always be here. It's not right or wrong. They'll be here as much as somebody has got to produce steel, for instance. As basic, as outdated as that is vis-a-vis the age of information, if we didn't have steel, the age of information wouldn't work. I already pointed that out. You'd have no computers, you'd have no phone lines, you'd have no way to transmit this kind of information. So somebody's got to do it. But the people doing it are not at the cutting edge of city life. Those doing it do not have to talk much, which coincidentally, if you're working down in mines, notice you don't have to talk a lot. Or notice this coincidentally. You can't talk a lot because it's real noisy. Isn't that coincidental? Yeah, it's some kind of trick. Yeah, I know. Those who are primary heavy. You know, like some kind of doll that the head's too big. Of course, in this case, you have to stand on its head and play with dimensions. But it's out of balance. Those that are too primary heavy are more and more obsolete. I don't mean they're going to go away, because somebody's got to do it. And not just somebody out there, somebody in you has to do it. Somebody still has to take care of the grunt work. As far as coincidence, one more thing. Things appear only coincidental in a finite world. And incidentally. Only those living in a neural closet can even see coincidences as being coincidental. And also, it is only such closet dwellers that ever require Captain Irony's assistance. You cannot have irony without coincidence. Ah, that's not what we call it around here. Well, shape up. That's what it is. I gave them that free. Can we do 8 minutes worth of real quick? How about some specifics regarding this that are just right before your eyes? You might care to note that in the modern kind of codifying of collective thought comes speech. All the forms that out there in the ordinary world, all forms of expertise, all forms of analysis, all forms of assistance from one human to another that is offered on the basis of speech is based on speech in such a way that it's not seen as being the linchpin. It's not seen as being the inescapable primary basis. All right. To be an expert, to offer assistance, to offer direction, to offer an analysis of anything in contemporary life, mute demonstrations are no longer sufficient. Does everybody understand that? Now, in a sense, this wouldn't even work, but to give you somewhere to start with it, in a sense, if we're going to get down to a pretty primary level, a good hobby, if someone was going to teach you to high jump, they could do it with not really saying anything. They could, point to the high jump, and they could just simply go do it and jump over the bar and then point to you. And then whatever they saw that you did wrong up to a certain point, they could, with no speech, give you some instruction. They could at least demonstrate it. You understand? But do you also understand there is no way to go teach somebody to run a computer through mute demonstration? You cannot be an active player in the information age and be limited to mute demonstrations, no matter how good you are. You cannot teach someone physics, even if you are the world's outstanding physicist. There is no way that you can try and compete with the world's outstanding high jumper, and that he's going to instruct some new novice and you're going to take a neophyte in your field. Do not expect to be a close race. You cannot instruct someone in physics by mute demonstration. The machinery of life now, of modern life, the organized life of man, the organism himself, is based upon speech. The machinery that runs contemporary life cannot be built, it cannot be conveyed, it cannot be described, it cannot be sustained, it cannot be repaired without talking about it. Did that cover it all? Do you follow? You could not have built, let's take computers as just being a tangible, quick example of the information age, and then of course those of you who can see better, the growing importance on the basis that speech has become a primary, but the growing importance daily in your life, in humanity's life, that men must talk more and more. Now on that basis, do you see that nothing, let's take the computer as being exemplary of that, a tangible example, it could not have been built without speech, it cannot be sustained without speech. If one guy had built one or made it up in his mind, he couldn't tell others who actually physically could put it together and dig out the elements and put them together and do all the... He could not unless he could have talked about it. The secondary world cannot even be conceived of, much less built, kept up, sustained, repaired, improved upon without speech. Now, that would seem perhaps obvious enough there. But all experts get out of the field of tangible such as machinery. All areas of expertise, experts themselves in the secondary world must be talkers. You cannot be an expert in the secondary world and not talk. It is only talkers who have any talent that is up to date. Any derogatory aspect that has been cast, those of you that keep up with such things, is they have attacked certain forms of television on the basis of certain shows, of certain aspects of certain shows, as being nothing but talking heads. That's not very much television, like we're inclined to do here with our operations that just show me or whoever's up here, and it's just this. Instead of being out there and having action shots and a second unit out doing other things and touring the world and exteriors, talking heads, pretty cheap TV. It's no longer true. Jump from the literal to metaphorical and then to symbolic right quick. Talking heads is no longer a derogatory term, even though it may be out there. Because you might notice the coincidental rise, how about this, of talk shows. And those of you who don't know it from a fiscal view, surely you do, talk shows are proliferating and take television now just being another aspect. Not good or bad, no comment on artistic value and all that. Television as a tangible aspect of the information age. You must surely note the ever increasing growth of talk shows. And from one explanation is, and they would even justify it and explain it and admit it, is so much cheaper. They can put together an hour talk show for I don't know what, X amount, whereas an hour of normal television at network quality level, production level, is 50, 100 times as expensive. And so you got more and more talk shows because they cost less, they would say, to produce. Aha! How about let's go into something that seems to be even a little more specific to the information age, news shows themselves. Do you notice that there are more and more talking heads in the full sense of that word on news shows? Would you explain that more? All right. They have more and more people on the shows who are experts. They don't just report the news. They don't have to just have cameras over there. Here it is, late August, circa 1991, and the recent unpleasantness in Russia, the attempted coup. They do not have to just have cameramen over there paying all these great salaries to do it. They can have just a little of their pickup from some freelance guy and keep showing a loop of the same tank running down the street over and over, and they do that for about a minute, and then they'll say, and we have with us today from Rutgers University, from Columbia University, we have one of the world's leading experts in Russian affairs. They got him free. The man would pay to be on, but anyway, they got him free. The networks are admitting that they are now cutting back because of all sorts of things. But they admit they're cutting back. Notice the coincidence. They're cutting back, and they're doing less and less, you had notice, of actual gathering of news. That is, of sending people out and paying their travel and all that. They'll have a little bit of it, plus they can buy it now from third-party sources outside the network and show a little clip and then have an expert to do an analysis, which is to do what? To talk about it. We're not attacking it, but it's just gradually happened. And they would explain it, well, the networks are now in such competition with cable, with other things, that we cannot afford the kind of upkeep that we used to have to do for a worldwide news gathering organization. So now we give the basis of it, but nowadays it's not just the events that happen, they would say. I should be working for it. It's not just the events that would happen, it's we must understand its significance. We need somebody to analyze it. We need somebody to talk about it. See, and if you were cheap, ordinary, you could say, yeah, that's the kind of crap they try to pull on us. They're not pulling anything. See, they can defend it, and if you were part of that anomalous criticizing part of life's body, you could say, well, that shows. They're trying to pull another one over on us, and they're getting these experts. I hear ordinary intelligence can say, I hear what you're saying, and yeah, I agree with you. They're trying to take us. No, no, no. You got two views there. Take the real view. See it for what it is. It is the increasing need for speech. And it comes out, just coincidentally, it works in with them being able to save money. What a coincidence. But they get these guys to come on. They don't pay these experts. You know that, don't you? All they're paying is the guy that's sitting there doing the announcing, the anchor man himself. They get these experts to come in and to what? Talk free. They say it saves money. What a coincidence. If it didn't save money, they'd still be doing it, but the way it works. It is coincidental. It has simply reached the point that the news, in the widest sense of the word, now information, but the news, as they call it, is no longer sufficient. It's no longer sufficient for just to say 7 generals have toppled the government in Afghanistan and have now assumed control. That's no longer enough. It literally is not. You've now got to have somebody who may or may not seem to know what the hell he's doing, but here is the expert from the University of Omaha, who is an expert on Afghan affairs, and he has to analyze it. Now the analyzation, the talking about it, is as much part of the news as the news itself. And good night, ladies and gentlemen. Read it out. Coming back up. Are we still rolling? I want this. Is it? I don't see a light. Where's the red light? All right. That's more. I want to play TV. This is everybody here, and I just do it all at one time. And all you people, hello to New York, Stuttgart, Los Angeles, Islamabad, New York, Sofia, Philadelphia, Arizona, all of you, and then you people here. I wanted to say, every time I do an epilogue, I'm always threatened. I'm inclined to threaten to you people at the other cities, like, boy, I got to get out there soon. Now, I guess even you should be tired of cheap threats. Come see us then. But what I wanted to say was that everybody out there in the other cities, as you know, I get a report of attendance, which is not the KBG, it's no secret. I want to know who is attending out there, and we do one here. For you people in other cities, we have a list here, and I see it every night. I'm not anybody's mama, and I'm not keeping up. Not for some sense of spying on you. I want to know who's here. But I want to remind you, in the other cities, there's a list I get that's been printed up or Xerox that you know somebody, you're writing down your own names. And I get it mailed to me, and I get it here nightly, and I see who's there. And we have a place to mark that if you're not going to be there and you're part of the list, that you're part of the group in the other cities and here, I don't care how long you've been around here or who you are or what your middle name is, if you're there, sign your initial or something so that when I get it, either here or from other cities at a later date, I know you were there. And if you're not going to be there, either call somebody, tell them beforehand if you know you're not going to be here the next time that you guys are seeing tapes in other cities or the next time here, send word by somebody. Be called. Just do it. And my threat is, which I shouldn't have to do as a threat, but if I start looking down the reports from other cities or here, that's what I was going to tell you, and I see some kind of consistent pattern, it'll finally strike even me that you hadn't been here for a while, and I don't see as a rule that you in some way just sent word that I won't be here. You don't have to explain everything why if you say I'm not going to be here. But if I just don't hear anything, I'm going to literally, and of course in an important way, which is non-literally, I'm just going to delete you from the list. So out there at the other cities, even though I'm not sitting there in person looking at it, if you're not going to be there, send word some way to the group there in your city. Whoever's keeping charge or whatever arrangement you have, or if you know beforehand, tell them, I won't be here next Wednesday. I won't be here the next time we're meeting. Just so that I know that, just so that you keep in touch, or else I'm going to pluck you from the squash patch. Which thankfully we don't have time to go into what that means because, believe me, you don't want to know. Goodbye. And don't forget St. Quantum's coming, right? You get a legal, legitimate way in which to be a dumbass, right? Well, to express your more, to release the straitjacket of civilization, by which I know so many of you are unduly clutched. Bye.